Hey, what's up everybody? I genuinely cannot believe that Star Wars has put this character into live action. Huge spoilers await in this episode as we go through the final part of The Acolyte show and some huge cameos that have taken place in the season finale. Huge spoilers ahead, so do be warned, but let's get straight into it in the fact that this show has revealed in live action for the first time ever Darth Plagueis. He has finally been revealed, and it's probably, albeit for just a few seconds, the biggest and most shocking thing that takes place in this entire series. It's the biggest thing that connects this show to The Phantom Menace Episode 1 in the movies. Now, he only actually appears for literally just a few seconds, and it's basically him hiding in a cave on the planet or on the island that Kimir has set up his little kind of base, where Osha is currently with him in that particular episode, as they set off to go and find Sol and May. But you just see him kind of lurking and hiding behind some rocks, watching them flying away in their ship, and he's just there left on his island. Now, we assume, because we don't get any context, that he's not actually spoken to or interacted with Kimir in any particular way, but it certainly sets up the possibility that they might do a season 2 in which we start to see Darth Plagueis' story kind of being told for the first time outside of books, and I dare say that the fan base probably isn't happy about this. Certainly from what I've seen online, they're not happy that Darth Plagueis' story could get touched and interfered with by Lucasfilm and Disney. They'd rather that it just be left alone. But having said that, at the same time, seeing him in live action, albeit for just that brief moment, and the possibility and the potential that they may actually start to tell his story in live action, I think is awesome. That's so cool, and actually kind of gives this show some relevance that it never really had before. So it may well be that The Acolyte is introducing Plagueis and it's going to tell that story in seasons to come, leading up to The Phantom Menace, where we start then to see the Sith properly revealing themselves. On that note, this episode does do what I predicted it would do in previous episodes of this vlog, where a lot of the major characters have got to come to an end. They've got to expire before the end of the series, because if they go back and the Jedi Council find out that the Sith exist, then obviously by the time you get to The Phantom Menace, where they speak that famous line that the Sith have been extinct for a millennia, they obviously wouldn't know that to be the case or believe that to be true if they'd found out in The Acolyte 100 years prior that actually the Sith did exist, and then it's Kimir, and then it's Osha and May, and that Plagueis exists. So naturally, a lot of the characters in this that could have gone and told the Council about Kimir and the Sith and the fact that they're real, they all had to basically meet their demise before that story could be told. And spoiler alert, that is what happens, and in the end Sol does pass, and unfortunately for that character, I kind of feel like it just had to be done. You had to do that. You could not allow him to carry on to go back to the Jedi and tell them everything that has happened, which is what he obviously would have done and what he wanted to do. If he'd done that and gone back, it would have broken canon completely. So the fact that they've actually been somewhat more conservative of the timeline and actually preserving it in that way, that I think was the biggest threat in this show. By having the Sith in it from quite early on, we always had that presence, and then by the time you get to sort of episodes 3 and 4, you knew that it was definitely a Sith, or quite likely, and well into the second half of the series they are calling themselves Sith, so you knew that's what they were. So it's kind of, you're treading on thin ice and really kind of balancing this very fine line that the Sith are obviously exist and we're seeing them, and we're seeing them interact with Jedi, means that by the time you get to The Phantom Menace, those stories have got to be hidden from the Jedi. They can't know that that is happening. So whatever Jedi are involved and interacting in this show means that ultimately they're not going to survive it. So that's what I predicted, and that is what comes to pass. Sol does actually meet his demise by the end of this particular episode in the finale. I have to say though, before he finally left, some epic action sequences and fight sequences between him and Kimir, and they were so good. Those fight scenes were epic, very kind of reminiscent of Revenge of the Sith. You know, it's very fast paced and very powerful fighting and all this kind of thing, not the sort of slower, almost lethargic style that they used in the sequel trilogy. It's more akin to the prequels, where it's actually kind of a perfect combination of both, where it's very powerful hitting, but with intensity and with speed and ferociousness, that just made that fight sequences between those two characters really brilliant. I really enjoyed that, and I'd wished that they'd had more of it. We only really had 2 episodes where we get those fight sequences. The one where Kimir is kind of revealed sort of halfway through the show, and then in obviously the finale where they wanted, you know, a big action sequence, a big fight scene to kind of finish things off. So they had it in there, which was great, but I would have liked some more of it because it was so cool. It was so brilliantly well done with his Cortosis helmet and all this kind of stuff. Kimir, I think, is easily the standout character in this entire show for me, Plagueis aside. He is so cool, in my opinion, as a Sith. He looks great. He's got that kind of weird, enchanting menace to him. He's engaging, and he just looks awesome. And obviously, with the helmet, means it's probably not the actor doing a lot of the choreography in terms of the fight sequences. But because of that, means that you can have someone who is so good at saber combat that it just looks fantastic on screen. It's just brilliantly well done, a really great villain. And it will be interesting to see, does Kimir go and get betrayed later by Osha, who becomes his new apprentice by the end of this series? Is it Osha that betrays him and kills him, and then she takes on Plagueis as her apprentice? Or is it that Plagueis becomes Kimir's apprentice and ends up killing them both? We have absolutely no idea, and maybe that's what we would find out in a season 2. On that note, it's actually really interesting because I think by about episode sort of 5, 6, we were beginning to sort of see characters, Osha and May, sort of switching and reversing roles ever so slightly, where Osha was suddenly becoming a little bit more pulled towards the dark side, and May was sort of going the other way, not quite all the way to the Jedi, but you could see like their costumes had changed. One was getting from light to dark and one from dark to light. And naturally by the end of the series, they have entirely switched, and it's Osha that goes from being a failed Jedi to actually being a Sith apprentice and taking Kimir's hand and fully embracing the fact that she's going to go down the route of the Sith. How that then connects to Plagueis exactly, we don't know, but we do know that he's there, and that's a huge thing. And ultimately, it's that if they did do a season 2, that's going to be surely has to be the driving factor in the main storyline in that particular series. If they do a season 2, there's a massive part of me that thinks that they won't, though. I would be really surprised if they did do a second series, purely because the reaction from the fan base to this show has been so negative. I have no argument with that. The things that they're actually complaining about are legitimate, and it's actually really telling when the creators of the show come out saying that they actually don't care. They don't care about upsetting the fan base, and I swear they go out of their way to actually antagonize them. By messing around with Anakin's backstory, potentially bringing in characters from episode 1 that shouldn't even be alive yet, you know, it's these silly little mistakes where they almost seem to be doing it on purpose. And in interviews, the creators have said that they almost do go out of their way to actually upset and antagonize the fan base. So they don't do themselves any favors, and they will end up getting that hatred. And if you're going to go out of your way to upset people, then you're going to get it, and you kind of deserve it. So it's sort of, you know, you're treading a fine line all the time with the Star Wars fan base is to trying to make people happy and not upset too many people. But you're inevitably going to fail if you go out of your way to do it. It's just kind of weird, and I don't really understand that as a marketing strategy, as a way of creating content. You want people to watch it, you want people to enjoy it. Why are you actually deliberately going out of your way to upset people? It's just very bizarre, and it's clear that Lucasfilm are kind of heading in this particular direction and have done for quite some time. But this show, for me, really showed it as being almost hazardous. It's quite toxic in the way that they're treating a toxic fan base. They're only making it worse and stirring the pot. And rather than focusing on what they should be doing, which is telling great stories, sticking to the lore, not breaking canon, and preserving characters that are so beloved, by going out of your way to break all of that, I mean, this, to me, that's why I can't see there being a second series, because if anybody at Disney has any common sense, you would argue that surely they wouldn't actually greenlight a second series after how badly this has been review bombed. You've had obviously a lot of people online, myself included, that have not been happy about certain things, and that's really hard for me. I mean, I'm a big Disney and Star Wars fan. I love both those franchises, and you know, they're the whole premise of my entire channel here. But even more so for guys like, say, Star Wars Theory, his entire life is based on Star Wars and these stories and telling them and talking about them. I don't really understand why you would go out of your way to upset that and just throw yet more kind of toxic waste into something that is already spewing over with just hatred and vile a lot of the time. Go out of your way to make great content. Don't go out of your way to upset people. Surely that's obvious. I had also said in one of the earlier episodes about this show that what I didn't want to see was a cameo by Yoda, and we get it. We finally get it at the very end of this episode. And now, albeit all you see is the back of his head and Venestra basically going to talk to him. The reason why I didn't want Yoda in this is because I feel like Yoda is in absolutely everything. And it makes sense. He's like the one and only species that lives long enough to be able to span this entire universe. But it's kind of frustrating where you get brand new content and it's Yoda again. We've had the High Republic books and Yoda's in it. Now we've got the Acolyte show and Yoda's in it. And then you get the prequels and Yoda's in it. And then you get the originals and obviously Yoda is in it. And then he appears even in the sequels as a Force ghost. And I'm like, I get that the character is beloved, but do we really need to see him in absolutely everything? I don't quite see why it needs to rely on him, of all people, so heavily. If you're going to rely on a character, rely on Anakin. He's so much better and cooler, and it's just, I don't really understand this attachment and this fixation with Yoda. So I had said earlier on that I didn't really want a cameo from him because I feel like you're just doing it for cameo's sake. And ultimately that's all that happens then in this episode, is you see the back of his head as Venestra walks into a room and says, "I've got something to tell you," cut scene, and then that's the end of the series. I feel like it's just pointless. It doesn't do anything, but it's like, oh, well, do I want to watch this because Yoda is in it? Well, probably not, but realistically, it's there for the sake of it being there and not because it adds anything of actual value to the show. So I had hoped that they wouldn't put him in. They obviously did. It sort of sets up a second season in the fact that you see Venestra going in, saying to him, "I need to tell you about this," and then they cut the scene so we don't know what it is that she actually says. Now, it's either one of two things, in my opinion. Either she's going to tell him about what has happened with Sol and give him the same story that she has with the Republic, and actually telling him that Sol was essentially a traitor, is a bit of a harsh word, but the fact that he was a rogue Jedi and that he was the one that had killed everybody and that it was all his fault, and basically putting all the blame on him, thus not revealing the Sith. I'm not entirely sure that Venestra knows about the Sith, but her other option is to actually confess what seems to be her relationship to Kimir, in that, although we don't really see it, we do know that there is something between the two of them, because when the two characters get very close to one another in that final episode, they're obviously connected through the Force and they are aware of each other's presences. And she says that she thought that he was dead, or that she was shocked that he was alive, or something like that. And then he quickly puts on his cortosis helmet again so that he can't have his mind read and can't be tracked. So it stands to reason that there's obviously backstory there between the two of them. There's obviously something there that needs to be told. And she must be aware to some degree that obviously he has turned away from the Jedi, and that he's presumably gone off to the dark side. It's interesting because obviously Venestra is like representative of the High Jedi Council, so you've got to be really, really careful that either she doesn't confess whatever that story is and keeps it hidden so that the Jedi don't discover the Sith, or she's just not entirely aware of the fact that Kimir has actually gone full on dark side. So it's a little bit of a fine line. I'm not sure that that's the story that she will tell Yoda. It may well simply just be about what Sol has done. We don't know, and if they do a second series, that's probably where we'll find out. But going back to Kimir and him being, I think, the better character in this show, we don't get to see his backstory like we do with the others. We obviously get hints to it and these little nods to the fact that, you know, there's obviously at some point Venestra was presumably training him, and in some way he feels he was betrayed by her, and then he's gone off and done his own thing and obviously turned to the dark side and to the Sith in doing that. But we don't know exactly what the betrayal is. We don't know what that story is. We're never told. So we assume that that is being left for a second season, along with potentially Plagueis and maybe Yoda getting involved, and certainly Venestra's story kind of being laid out and actually finding out what that is and what's been going on. So there are sort of a lot of loose threads that they could potentially do for a second series. But again, I still think it's a big ask for them to actually make it. And I feel like the threads that they've left, you could kind of just make up your own headcanon for that, like I just have, and basically assumed what it is that they're going to talk about. Ultimately, the biggest thing is, though, the Jedi must not find out about the Sith. That is the hugest thing. So you've managed to get to the end of this series. they haven't really done too much damage as far as that story is concerned. To some degree, the Sith are still very much hidden and out of view from the Jedi, certainly from the Jedi Council, and that every Jedi who had accounted Kimir as a Sith has basically been destroyed. So we know that that legacy, if you like, is somewhat intact, and that to me was the biggest thing. Still don't like the fact that they were playing around with Anakin was obviously the chosen one because he was created by the Force. Now you've got these other two characters of Osha and May that similarly, it is confirmed in this episode that they are created by the Force. I don't really think that that's a good idea, and again it's just aiming antagonism at prequel fans. I don't really understand why you would do that. Anakin is like sacred, you can't really mess around with him, so it's trying to, you know, again, you're treading that fine line. He's such a valued character and so well loved and so revered that why would you take his story and go and put it into somebody else with Osha and May and take away his title of the chosen one? So it's kind of a bit of a kick in the teeth. That for me was probably the biggest faux pas really as far as the whole show was concerned, was that Osha and May were born of the Force. I get that they're powerful, but you really didn't need that. You really didn't need it. I mean, you could just say that they were just two ordinary kids, twin sisters that were brought up, and that they were ultimately trained by these witches to use the Force, and that they're just powerful. You don't have to kind of go through the whole born of the Force, now there's a chosen three people that we know of. So I didn't really feel that that was necessary. The argument against that is that Sol was using the convergence as being the reason why they were created, or how they were created through the Force, and that was justification somehow for attacking the witches and taking over their fortress and blah blah blah. So it's a little iffy to me, and I feel like where you had the Ahsoka show and you had Anakin in it, it was so beautifully well done and so emotionally impactful that all it ever did was actually enhance Anakin's story. By sort of manipulating other characters along that same kind of chosen one arc, just detracts away from Anakin being so special, and I think that to me was the biggest sort of downside of this show, is that they really messed that up. They didn't need to do it, but they obviously try to make it interesting, and to me it's a bit of a fail. I feel like that was a massive slip up from the creators of this show, for me anyway. So there we go, that is the end of the Acolyte series. Again, I don't know if they'll do a season 2. They've certainly left enough threads that they could pick it up and do one, but given the fan reaction to it, whether or not they will, I'm not entirely sure. Who knows? We shall see. So with that said, and on that terrible disappointment, please do leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Did you enjoy the season overall? What did you think of the final episode? What did you think of Plagueis being in it? What did you think of Yoda being in it? And do you think that they're going to do a second series? And if they do, what story is it that they're going to tell? Surely it's got to be about Plagueis. So with that said, yeah, please give the video a like. Please leave a comment. Please subscribe. And with that said, I will see you guys real soon.